Chapter 14, Bureaucracy and the Administrative State. Bureaucracy is the unelected organization that carries out government policy. Forms of organization within the division of labor and hierarchy of authority and impersonal rules are not mentioned in the Constitution. It's the modern rise of autonomous administrative state. Remember, bureaucrat is somebody that is non-elected. Is the sum of the government organizations that carries out public policy. In case every government in history has had bureaucracy, the more precise definition from sociologist Max Weber, bureaucracy is also involved in the division of labor, hierarchy of authority, and personal rules. Upset such rules, people often sneer at bureaucracy. They're happy to apply the term to the neutral sense. Likewise, they use the term bureaucrats for those who staff government organizations. What do bureaucrats do? Well, bureaucrats provide information for deliberation on policy, issue administrative rules, which aim for accountability and deliberation. They have administrative procedure that they're supposed to work with, on how they're supposed to get things done. However, this causes a lot of red tape. You will see in any incident that we've had in the last several years, you name an incident and who's in charge, what's going to be done with them, who's going, where's the funding going to come from. This causes a lot of hiccups. New federal registry, pages by decade, on how procedure has changed. Lots of rules have come in. Structure. There's the cabinet department. There's the independent agencies. There's independent regulatory commissions, government corporations, and government-sponsored enterprises. All of this is part of the structure of how things are going to work. So an independent regulatory commission, is a government organization that issues rules and conducts quasi-judicial proceedings. The president names members and chair of each commission, selects Senate confirmation, but these officials serve as fixed term and are not subject to presidential dismissal without good cause. The government corporations, owned corporations that provide goods and services for which the private sector presumably cannot meet the needs, and government-sponsored enterprises, federally chartered but privately owned corporations that seek to improve the flow of credit. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, home loans. The government corporation, that would be the United States Postal Service, competitive mail. So here's how the department, there's the secretary in the center, their chief of staff, and how it breaks down to where it comes down to who's in charge and what's going on. So you see a lot of jobs there. Jurisdiction. Jurisdiction sometimes are complex, which makes it difficult to determine jurisdiction. We get into turf wars, and coordinating problems make it difficult for bureaucrats to do their job. Who's in charge and what, when there's a terrorist attack, you have multiple jurisdictions that come in. FBI, ATF, state, city, local, all of those, and they have to figure out who's going to be in charge to coordinate problems plagued by federal administration. So here's a list of the the federal drug control funding. Now I want you to look at this. Federal drug control. Well, you look at that. The State Department, the Department of Treasury, the Department of Veterans Affairs. Money is going to all of these departments to control drugs. It's not just as simple as Department of Health and Human Services. Size of government. Federal civil workforce decreased in the late 20th century. State and local government payrolls increased, but federal increased in the 21st century. We have federal mandates that were sent to the state, like No Child Left Behind, where the government is saying the state has to do this, and then we come back to it. Outsourcing is a context of public policies and practices of carrying out government functions by giving grants or contracts to the private sector. More than 10 million jobs come from federal grants or contracts in 2005, up from 7.5 million in 1990. If you measure the size of federal government by its civilian and military workforce plus the guarantee of contractors, you get a very different picture. Between 1990 and 2005, the total increased from 12.6 million to 14.6 million. Okay, there's the federal jobs, and the blue is the state jobs. Remember, we've outsourced where it's went to states instead of the federal government. Today, most federal employees get their jobs through a merit system. It was created through the Pendleton Act. A merit system, a government personnel practice in which hiring and promoting hinges on individual qualifications instead of a political affiliation. Before we had the Pendleton Act, we had the spoils system. President Jackson, and before them. Okay, the spoils system, a practice of giving jobs or contracts on the basis of political ties instead of merit. So then the Pendleton Act comes in. It's also called the Civil Service Reform Act. In 1883, federal law that set up the merit-based system for choosing government employees and supervising their work. And so there's an examination that comes in. Prior to the Pendleton Act, government jobs were granted through the spoils system. Not allowed to unionize until the mid-20th century, and the Hatch Act restricts political activity to federal employees. In 1939, Congress passed the Hatch Act, which barred federal employees from most partisan political activities. In 1993, Congress amended the Hatch Act. While the law still forbids federal employees to engage in partisan activities on the job or run in partisan elections, most may now use their off-duty hours in partisan campaigns. According to the Federal Employees Union, their political action committees have become a major political force. Their get-out-to-vote drives played a part in helping the Democrats win control of Congress in 2006 and the White House in 2008. Now, remember, if you are an active duty personnel, you're required of what you can and can't do. If you live on base housing, you can't have any yard signs. But with yard signs, we need to remember that it is a federal offense if you take a yard sign out of someone else's yard. Performance. Federal employees may be released for poor work or misconduct, but have the right to appeal, which may take months. Okay, you can get rid of anybody in a job if you're willing to do the paperwork. And that's the problem. People don't want to dot every I and cross every T to get rid of a poor performing person. Many concerns about waste, fraud, and abuse in bureaucracy have occurred, especially since the 1980s. A federal panel studied the horror stories of the Pentagon purchasing a 3-cent screw for $91 a piece. Ridiculous. Somebody charging so much more than it should. And that becomes part of the problem of, yes, we want the best deal, so we're not going to drive up the prices when you could go to the local hardware store and get it for 31 cents. Organizational culture. Shared belief within an organization about how its members should deal with problems and carry on their daily tasks. It is the way we do things here. If an organizational culture does not or will not adapt, failure of the program may be the consequence. Diverse tasks may hinder maintaining a positive culture. And you have to make sure that we're strengthening that. I know in the book it talks about NASA and how people seen the obstacles of NASA, and that was kind of the problem, because organized culture rendered NASA too bold. It made other bureaucrats too timid. By 2005, the Federal Emergency Management, FEMA, did not see its role as a disaster of the command to first respond. It was the job of state and local governments. Instead, FEMA would coordinate with other bureaucracies, providing money and information. After Hurricane Katrina's overwhelming policy and the fire department of the Gulf Coast. FEMA was slowly to move. Agencies asked firefighter nationwide of volunteers to recovery efforts, and when they were answered the call, however, they learned that FEMA wanted them to hand out pamphlets, not join the emergency work. Before they could start, they also had to undergo training about diversity, sexual harassment, and data outputting. And so it became a tie that they didn't want to have happen. Iron triangles. An iron triangle is your political alliance of executive branches, congressional committees, and interest groups. Okay, so it would be like, so if we did the Food and Drug Administration would be the interest group or the political alliance. The Food and Drug Administration compared to health and safety, and it's how they work together to get these policies. Well, the Food and Drug Administration, they want safe things. Well, if we break it down to food distribution within the United States wants to be able to get their product out so it's safe, and they don't want their hands tied by the Food and Drug Administration, and they don't want a whole bunch of rules. But on the other hand, they want safety rules in place so that their companies don't get sued if something happens. Issue networks. Loose grouping of people of organizations that seek to influence policy, including not only members of the traditional iron triangles, but also policy experts in university, think tanks, and media, also called policy communities. They're a group of people. They streamline items that can get developed versus homegrown. They're always looking at ways to get their goals to align. They might not be allies, but they want to align the goals in order to work together. So the NRA will work with the AARP because they have a goal of what they want. Dissent and resistance. They may voice their views internally. They may go outside and work with issue network members, and they may resist implementation of policies. The problem with dragging their feet on policies or with not slowness of bureaucracy action can have many sources, including requirement of Administrative Procedure Act. It can be very hard to distinguish intentional foot dragging or inevitable automatic delays. Bureaucrats' sense of citizenship. Surveying of political appointees shows that they perceive civil servants as responsible and competent. Civil servants and political appointees appear to have a positive working relationship, citizens as well as bureaucrats. So we see them as actual working people. Executive branch. 2 qualities for presidential appointees. Are they loyal to the president and their agenda, and what is their knowledge based? That becomes important for them. Are they how a president is going to pick somebody? Because if they don't see somebody as loyal, they're not going to stay. Presidents control bureaucracy through drafting spending plans and reviewing the draft rules from the OMB and the OIRA. The OMB is Office of Management and Budget, and the OIRA is the Information and Regulatory Affairs, sets policies and statistics, and reviews drafts rules before publication. If a draft rule clashes with a policy, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs can send it back for revision. It doesn't always work the way we want to, but it becomes an issue. It's a safeguard. Inspector General, an official within the federal agency who runs independent investigations into bureaucratic operations and makes recommendations to stop waste. That's what they're supposed to do. And they often receive information for what are known as whistleblowers. Whistleblowers, a federal employee who reports waste, fraud, and abuse and misconduct. What has happened in the past is whistleblowers tend to lose their job for simple reasons that they weren't looked at before. So now we have a safeguard for whistleblowers. Congress, oversight of bureaucracy. Answering constituents' concerns and complaints. We have the Office of Government Accountability Office, formerly the General Accounting Office, an independent, nonpartisan agency that works in Congress, investigates how federal government spends taxpayers' dollars. I think they could do a little bit better job sometimes. Congressional Review Act, a federal law that requires agencies to send rules to Congress for a review 60 days before they take effect. It makes slow rulemaking. Although Congress has killed only one regulation this way, it's very possibly such actions encourage regulators to keep congressional preferences in mind when they're making new rules. Courts, oversight of bureaucracy. Citizen sue when bureaucracy cannot or will not act. Judicial review, which we elevated the courts to a higher model. Courts may not be able to resolve technical issues that bureaucrats can. That's the other problem. Press and the public. Media often overlooks the bureaucracy, but when it does not cover it, coverage may be exaggerated. Interest groups may be more effective in getting the public to act on bureaucratic issues than anybody else. You know, the AARP, the NRA, they're very good at getting information out before the press can. Markets. An alternative to a bureaucracy providing services or regulating citizens' business would become an economic incentives and outsourcing. A government by market, but less red tape means less oversight, so they're not able to secure things. Comparing the military with civilian bureaucracy. Military has more clear performance measures during a time of war, but during times of peace they use the same measurement as the civilians. Military-industrial complex has been important in American political systems. History, control and oversight of military is important. It's another one of those cases that we have to make sure that we're raising the level of clear accounting when we're not in a time of war. New technology allows for more of a public role of deliberation. As organized cultures change, more people can see civil service as a way to serve their country. More opportunities for deliberations may emerge. Bureaucrats must encourage public participation in order to foster stimulation of this.